Kia ora everyone, and welcome back to Humankind. In this video, as a fan of Civilization and the Sid Meier's Civilization franchise, I'm going to tell you about some of the ways that I think this game, Humankind, gets rid of some of my pet peeves and some of the features that I don't enjoy as much about Civilization. In essence, we're going to discuss the ways that Humankind takes the Civ formula and improves on it. Now, I want to make it really clear, I'm not confidently in love with Humankind yet. We haven't had a chance to fully discover the game, but I am approaching this as someone who is a lifelong fan of Civilization. Without any further ado, let's jump straight in. And I have to say, for starters, one of the things that I really love about Civ is that early game. And I think that many of us are the same, right? We like to explore our little bit of the map, imagine where we're going to place our cities, discover our opponents, so on and so forth. And one of the things about Civ is that because you spawn with the settler, you're really incentivized to settle as soon as you can, and after that initial discovery phase is over, you find that after merely 10 or 20 turns, you're in many ways locked into an approximate location and locked into a strategy, right? And that's not always a bad thing, but at least that's my personal experience. At the start of a Civ game, you will all know, probably, that you spawn with a settler unit, and you really must settle it as soon as you can. You're forced to make, up front, some really significant decisions that you'll be stuck with probably for the rest of the game. In Humankind, however, you're not pressured in the beginning to pick your forever home, your forever civilization. Primarily, that's because you don't actually need a city to build units. Your starting unit can produce more of itself, it can self-replicate, it can hunt, it can gather, and it can produce more units, right? But also, you can shift the location of an outpost before it turns into a city. So, not only do you have more flexibility with your units, i.e. you're not pigeonholed into settling at the beginning of the game, but you can actually just keep roaming around. In fact, you're encouraged to, right? The first era of the game, you are a nomadic tribe. You're a nomadic culture. So it makes sense that you're not pigeonholed into certain decisions. You're more allowed to be open and explore, and I like that a lot, because it builds on, like I say, one of my favourite parts of the game and makes it better still. Which actually ties me really nicely into my next point, that's around building cities. As I say, city creation in Humankind is handled really totally different to Civ. It is much more flexible. So you start by founding an outpost, which is not a city. It's sort of, you could think about it as the early stages of a city, because that's what it can be, but it doesn't have to be either. It can actually just be an outpost that can stand alone or attach to a city. So you can take a pre-existing city that has evolved from an outpost, open up your map overview, click on an outpost, and attach it to the city. The outpost then shares its production and yields with the city tile, but you get to keep the land where you placed your outpost, so you get to keep that region under your control. The reason why this matters, I think, is twofold. Firstly, again, it's very flexible. You build an outpost, it doesn't have to be a city, it can stay as an outpost. You can disconnect it from a city and connect it to another one if you find that it has a more natural pairing in the future, and outposts can be relocated or evolved into cities. So the outpost model innately is very, very flexible. Other second, and I would actually argue almost more important part of the outpost system is that it allows you to claim land and therefore the resources on that land without having to build a city, right? I think we've all been there in Civ, right? We need iron, we need coal, whatever it is. We need a strategic resource, and we find it on the map and we see, we got unlucky, it's not in our territory. Oh man. Now I'm going to have to send a settler there to settle that land, build an absolute crap city, purely to connect a strategic resource. We've all been there. It's a little bit better in Civ 6 than it is in Civ 5. It's worse in Civ 5, most definitely. But regardless, having the flexibility to claim land without having to build a city, even if you end up just ignoring that city, that doesn't matter. Having the flexibility is really, really key, and it's the second substantial thing that I think Humankind, from what we've seen so far, handles a little bit better, or at least a little bit more openly than Civilization does. More flexible, less pigeon-toed. Now, I have some other things that are a little smaller that I'll cover off at the end of the video, but before I do that, there's one more thing I'd like to cover now. It's the cultural system. And cultures as a whole. I've talked about this before, so I won't dwell on it for too long. I don't want to bore you, but the fact that there are 7 eras in Humankind, and at each era you can choose to change your culture. For those unfamiliar, a culture acts like a civilization does in Civ. It is the culture that you're playing, the Soviets, the Egyptians, whatever it might be. You can change it at each point, at each era. You can also choose to keep it the same if you want to keep your unique buildings and so on and so forth, and continue to work towards that culture's goal. Each culture has an affinity, right? Some are militaristic, some are economic, so on and so forth. The fact that you can flexibly change a culture not only mimics real life and the real-life development of civilizations and empires across time, but it actually makes the game much more rewarding as well, because again, you're not stuck in a strategy from the beginning. You can completely change up your cultural affinity, you can completely change up your unique buildings, and completely shift your focus in the game. And I think that's really, really powerful. I've talked more about this in other videos on the channel, so do check those out if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that. I will leave it there, but just note that that is a really, really significant part of why Humankind, I think, offers a more nuanced, in-depth and flexible experience than Civilization currently does. Now, I have a few smaller things, but I think these matter. Okay, I really do. First up, I would say, in Civilization, your hopes of owning something like, let's say, the Great Library, right, a really significant wonder, are completely squashed if you're playing on a higher difficulty, and of course, if another player beats you to it, right, that's it. The thrill of the race, the thrill of racing to the Great Library, is lost in Humankind. But I think that city planners like you and I will like the fact that the unique structures in this game, in Humankind, must be claimed before being built. Sure, it removes the whole, oh, racing for the wonder, I hope if I get it, I hope if I don't. It removes that sort of anticipation, but actually, it's really nice to just stake your claim on a wonder and know that you're not going to be wasting time on it, okay? So, a bit of a mixed bag, but I do think that's really important. Another thing that I think this game does really well is the use of the map, and we're actually seeing layers within a map, okay? It's not just mountain tile, you can't move past it, everything else is flat, but actually we're seeing some 3-dimensional layers to the map. I still really think it would be great to see traversable rivers, to actually have rivers as meaningful features that you can move up and down in boats, but regardless, Humankind does a much better job at having a dynamic map where terrain matters. It actually does block you or give you really significant advantages, and you can see there's around sort of 3 or 4 different layers to the map as well, so it's not just all mountains are the same, because of course in the real world, all mountains are not created equally, and Humankind does a great job at capturing that really dynamic, interesting terrain in comparison to Civilization anyway. More on the map, I would add, it's also divided into some really nice sections, and you will have seen it in the videos, in this video already. Borders from outposts are really clear. If you want to occupy a certain portion of land, then you know exactly how many cities and outposts you're going to need, and you're going to know where to put them, right? So it removes that element of guesswork. Now, that could be seen as a bad thing. You may not want to have a map that's pre-prescribed. I can see both arguments here, but I do think having a clear board in the beginning is helpful anyway. I'll put it that way. That one is a bit of more of a mixed bag, so I'd be really keen to know your thoughts. What do you think about having a map with some predetermined boundaries? Should there be predetermined boundaries for regions or not? Do let me know. It's an interesting one. And then lastly, I would say that whenever a Civ establishes an outpost, a Civ, of course, being a difficult word, right? How do you describe humankind? Do you say Civ? Do you say empire? Do you say culture? I don't know. Whenever an empire establishes an outpost near your border or generates some kind of grievance, right? And they are called grievances in this game. You can choose to ignore them, or you can use them to push and make demands. So grievances, unlike in Civilization, where it's just sort of this rudimentary number that adds up and it sort of has something to do with war weariness and don't be a dick, but they'll still generate grievances anyway, so who knows. In Humankind, actually, it's much more straightforward and actually acts more as a useful game mechanic rather than sort of an unknown numerical metric just thrown in there for fun, right? So, of course, as I say, you can ignore them or you can choose to push them. You can push your grievances. And you can actually end up taking it all the way to war. And your grievances will sort of support your war effort. If you hold a lot of grievances, if they're refusing your demands, then you can declare war on them. I love that humankind lets us use diplomacy in more of a tangible way, right? And it actually makes a lot more sense as well. The grievances system really makes sense. There's a clear path to warfare. It's logical. It's not just this random declaration of war. You can actually see grievances being built up, being pushed, being rejected, right? Because you get to choose how to respond. And then ultimately, how that shapes the whole sort of role-playing, and also on a mechanical side, right? So there's the role-playing storytelling side, but then on a mechanical side, making much better use of a grievances model. That concludes this video on why I think Humankind can, in some ways, outdo Civilization. And the things that I've covered in this video, from the more flexible early game to cities and empires and cultures, wonders and terrain, are really important. And these are ways in which I think Civilization can improve, right? And we should see a mutual improvement over time as these two games feed off each other. Do I think Humankind will kill Civilization? No. I don't think it's a Civ killer. I think the two can coexist quite peacefully and learn off each other. If you enjoyed this video, I'm always really interested to hear your feedback, so do leave comments. I'll try and reply to all of them, or at least read all of them, and a like rating, as always, is really appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one, and when Humankind releases on the 17th of August later this year. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Ta-ta.